Good morning, everybody, and very warm welcome to the Higher Education Policy Institute webinar with Unite Students on the 2025 Unite Students Applicant Index. This report, now in its fourth year, and to which there is a link on the Higher Education Policy Institute website, tracks higher education applicants' attitudes. I'm Lucy Hare, I'm the Director of Partnerships at HEPI. We've got an absolutely fantastic panel for you this morning. Between them, they represent all perspectives really on the student journey. We've got Jenny Shaw, Director of Student Engagement at Unite Students, Andy Forbes, Director of Lifelong Education Institute and a former FE College Principal, and luckily for HEPI, also a member of our advisory board. We've got Mike Nicholson, Director of Recruitment, Admissions and Participation at the University of Cambridge, Lewis Wilson, Education and Employability Officer at the University of Sussex's Student Union, and finally, Eleni Bray, Assistant Head Teacher and Head of Sixth Form at Wanstead High School. So Jenny Shaw will kick off with an explanation of the index, and then each of our panelists will have 5 minutes to respond to it. And we'd ask them to keep to time so there's plenty of time for questions. So everybody watching this webinar, get your questions coming into the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, and also upvote any questions that you particularly like. And my colleague Emma, who's operating the tech, can actually turn on your mic and you can ask your own question when we get to that stage, or I can read them out if preferred. So without further ado, over to Jenny Shaw to report on this year's applicant index.
Okay, just trying to share my screen. Can you see my slides? I'm hoping someone's going to say yes.
Yes.
Excellent. Great. Well, I'm very happy this morning to be presenting the results of the fourth applicant index. As Lucy has said, it's the only broad-based survey of university applicants in the UK. And now it's in its fourth year, we can not only give a kind of a profile of this year's applicants, incoming students, but also look at trends as well. I'm also very excited to hear what the panelists are going to say about it too. So I'm just going to give you some top line results today. And I'm going to start with just showing you what it looks like. So as many of you will know already, the way we do this is we repeat many of the questions each year. And we use that to generate a number which represents the kind of the well-being and the confidence of applicants in each of these different themes. So basically, if the bar goes up, that's a good thing. If it goes down, it's not so good. And you'll see that last year, a few things did go down. It was a cohort that was particularly affected by the pandemic and the lockdowns, especially in terms of their learning confidence and their social confidence. But it's great to be able to say that this year things have got a little bit better. So I'm going to tell you all about that. So just to kind of run through it. So compared to last year, what can we expect from this year's new students? They are more sociable and community minded. They're saying that their well-being is better than last year, but also they are still concerned about their mental health. They feel slightly better about their finances, which is surprising, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. They're a bit more resilient. They're more confident about their employability. There's also a story behind that. And they're more independent. And finally, they're more secure in the academic skills. And that's a great relief, actually, because that's the area in which last year's cohort were particularly hard hit. That had dropped quite dramatically, and it has gone back up again this year. So that's a good news story, but it is a tale of two halves, I will say, because a lot of this is driven by more confidence and well-being amongst international applicants. Now, you would probably expect that because they are a self-selected group. They have the financial means and the confidence to be able to go to a different country to study. However, it does have implications. particularly for higher education providers who have made a bit of a switch in their undergraduate intakes to more UK students rather than internationals. UK applicants do have a different profile of support needs, and you may well be feeling the strain on some of those services already, and that's going to continue. So I thought it would be interesting to look at what they've experienced so far in their journey towards higher education. So in terms of community, so most of them are quite community minded. They get on well with other students at the school or college that they're in. But a quarter are lonely most all of the time. That didn't surprise me because I've seen that exact same stat for about 12 years amongst students and applicants. It seems to be particularly stubborn and difficult to change. If you survey students or applicants, almost always a quarter are lonely. Time off school. So this is something we've been tracking for the last 3 years. And what we find is this year, the same as last year, over a third have missed school or college due to their mental health over the last 2 years. So that's something we've been tracking. It hasn't gone up this year. It's still 36%. However, there's a little bit of an uptick in those who've been long-term absent due to their mental health. It is more prevalent amongst UK applicants, but it is still a thing for international applicants. It's almost a quarter. So I think it would be a mistake to think that this is just a UK phenomenon. It seems to be global. Sustainability. This is really interesting. So over half of applicants have made sacrifices to live more sustainably, which is kind of heartening. They're very committed to sustainability. But again, there's quite a big difference between international applicants and UK applicants. It's over 80% of international applicants have made sacrifices to live more sustainably, but much lower for UK applicants, and it's actually declined this year. So there's a widening gap. Something that slightly shocked me is that this year UK applicants are less likely to agree that it's important to tackle climate change. So something is changing there, and it may be of concern. Finally, mental health. Although the rate of mental health conditions as a disability does seem to be slightly falling, actually, if you ask about their experience, about half have experienced a mental health challenge over the last 2 years. So that's just a bit of background. What do they want? Part-time job. That is absolutely top of mind. 89% expect that they will work alongside their study in term time. And that kind of mirrors what's been going on with the Student Academic Experience Survey run by HEPI and Advance HE. It suggests that part-time working is going to continue to go up in the next year. Inclusion. So they nearly all want to feel like they belong at university, and we know that's a good thing. It has a big impact on retention and on attainment. But also, most of them are looking forward to making friends from different backgrounds, which is good. But almost half are anxious that they personally will not fit in. So expecting it to be quite inclusive, but they're afraid that that doesn't extend to them. I think that speaks to an anxiety. It's more common amongst women and particularly amongst neurodivergent applicants and LGBTQ plus applicants. So they're the groups that potentially need a little bit more reassurance about inclusion. Achievement, this is just quite a nice thing. About 3/4 have a clear idea of their goal. They're very driven. And similarly, 3/4, it's always that 3/4, 1/4 split, are confident about living independently. AI, do they want AI? That depends. If they are an international applicant, they really do. And they're used to using it, they expect to use it in higher education. However, UK applicants, not so much. So overall, almost a third reject AI. They don't want anything to do with it. They've not used it. And that's almost entirely due to UK applicants. So whatever your plans are for use of AI, it's going to be less popular quite significantly amongst UK students. And then finally, their hopes and fears. So we gave them a big long list. They could select more than one. Things that they're most looking forward to, top two, neck and neck, making new friends and building skills, making new friends more popular with women, building skills more popular with men. Studying to improve career prospects, very popular with international students. But a lot of applicants are really interested in their topic as well, in their field of study. And finally, the opportunity to be themselves. And that's quite across the board, actually, not many demographic differences there. The things that they're concerned about, the clear winner is missing family and friends. That's quite universal. Juggling academic work and a part-time job. And I think it just speaks to a level of realism amongst applicants. They do want part-time work. They know that they need it, but they are expecting it to be challenging as well. Struggling with mental health, it's particularly a concern for women. Maintaining a healthy diet is particularly a concern for international students coming into an unfamiliar country. And then finally, just kind of piling on that point two, having to study late into the night. So that's a very quick run through. There's so much more in the report itself, lots of demographic breakdowns as well. But that is just a quick profile of this year's applicants. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jenny, for the very clear explanation of the top lines from the report. I'm going to turn straight now to Andy to give some reflections.
Good morning, everybody. Yes, fascinating report. Unite are to be commended for doing this, and each year, of course, it builds up a series of data that begins to reveal some interesting trends. I mean, my main takeaway straight away is that overall this is positive. As Jenny just said, there's a sense of more resilience, a sense of confidence. I was particularly struck by the confidence about the prospects for getting a job, possibly because I've been reading lots of dire newspaper articles about how terrible the graduate job market is at the moment, but that doesn't seem to be affecting this cohort at all. And it's good to see that overall positivity. Also, I would say it's quite striking how in most cases, it's a reasonably stable picture. We're not seeing great lurches from year to year in the data. It's pretty consistent. But I'd like to pick out a couple of themes coming at it from my lifelong education perspective, my perspective having worked mainly in further education. One is, I think, something which has struck me from a variety of reports, but this one drives it home even further. And this is an increasingly what I'd describe as transactional approach to higher education. And one of the biggest changes I could see in the data, I may have missed something, is the interesting detail that those in 2019 who were asked what was their main motivation for going to university, 52% said, interest in my subject. That's down 20% to 32%. So less than a third of students are declaring that their main motivation is subject interest. And by the way, even getting a higher level of education, the data is down 8%. So it seems to me that it's less now about love of learning or whatever other romantic phrases we might put on that, much more about I am investing in something. I'm investing in higher education in order to get somewhere. That's why I'm saying it's transactional. And I expect a return on investment. And that return on investment will be, hopefully, a well-paid graduate career following university. So that transactional approach, I think, is becoming more and more embedded. It's pragmatic. It certainly isn't particularly romantic. Also, by the way, I'd mention the striking fact that very few of them seem particularly interested in teaching quality when they were looking at the choice of provider. So for us teachers, it's possibly a little bit depressing, but interest in subjects and teaching seems to be much less than it was. And the interest is in getting the qualification and the skills to be able to make progress in the jobs market. And I think that's the world we're living in. But I wanted to just say a few words quickly about the financial pressures, particularly I think the cost of living pressure, which is driving some very interesting behaviours. And I think increasingly what we're seeing is a diversification or a differentiation in the student cohort, driven by this cost of living issue, driven by this more transactional attitude, and driven by this sense that we are investing, and it is a family investment. Quite interesting to me that 53%, more than half, are expecting some form of financial support from parents and family, whether that's in the form of direct cash or whether that's in the form of actually living free of charge at home. So what you're now getting is, instead of the experience of going to university being a homogenous one, going into higher education is becoming a differentiated experience where you've got the majority, probably still 70–75%, expecting to be residential students in the traditional sense, physically present on a campus and all that goes with that sense of community, but an increasing number commuting in from home and therefore no longer the traditional residential student. I suspect, although this isn't something the report delves into great detail, an increasing number accessing online, remotely, increasing elements of education, and an increasing number either through doing degree apprenticeships or through combining work with part-time study are beginning to be part-time students who are working students as well. So I think what we're getting is more and more of a sense that there are different tribes, if you like, now in the higher education space. And each of those tribes may need slightly different, in fact, quite distinctly different, tailored services to give them that sense of belonging, connection, progress, etc., etc. Very different if you're a part-time commuting student than if you're a full-time resident on campus student, what your needs might be and what your perspectives might be. And I think that's what for all of providers to start thinking about that. Just finally, I think it is important to, in the context of lifelong education, to begin to look at how students are seeing what is their first experience of higher education. It was interesting to see about the positivity about going on to jobs. I'd be quite interested to delve more into how many of them are beginning to think about plans to sustain higher education beyond a first degree. Do they want to go on and do MAs? Are they thinking of coming back into higher ed at some point, or is this it for them? But I think overall, this, I say, a positive picture, but showing an interesting and I think progressive trend towards a greater diversification of the student experience, which points to the need for a greater diversification of the sorts of services that institutions are providing them. Thank you very much, Lucy.
Super, thank you, Andy. And now we turn straight to Mike, please.
Thanks very much, Lucy. And I think from my perspective, what we're seeing plays out in my contact I've had with applicants and teachers and advisors over the last 12 months. Certainly a growing greater confidence, I think, in applicants about the choices that they're making, greater question, sense of interest in, the specifics of the application process or what participation they'll be able to engage with when they're actually students at university, questions about courses. Now, I do recognise, working at the University of Cambridge, I'm probably seeing a particular slice of the applicant pool, but I do try and kind of engage more widely than just the University of Cambridge activity. I think the other thing that probably is feeding into some of the student confidence is, of course, the work that universities themselves are doing. There's been a significant uptick, I think, particularly since the pandemic, of universities using the application process to develop a sense of belonging amongst applicants, a lot of work going into converting applicant over from an offer holder into a firm offer holder. a lot of activity in engaging students with existing undergraduates and facilitating opportunities for students to have peer discussions and kind of creating a sense of cohort identity in a way that certainly wasn't happening 20, 30 years ago. So I think it's not surprising, I think, that students are maybe feeling more confident, feeling more engaged, because actually it ties in with some of the activity I think the university sector themselves are undertaking. I think there is also some interesting variation in how open students are willing to be now. We have seen some changes in the UCAS process itself, so greater focus in the reference to kind of highlight extenuating circumstances and a much clearer way that that's being presented now to universities, but also I think a greater willingness for candidates to declare disabilities, mental health conditions in the admissions process, or even in fact in advance of their application, to understand what level of support is going to exist and whether their particular needs are going to be met. And that's all to the good. I think, you know, the days where there was a real stigma attached in making these sort of declarations seems to have be on the wane, although not entirely disappeared from the application process. I think there's still some concern, lurking concern maybe from some students and maybe more with their parents about the consequences of making a declaration and will that bias a decision against them. I think we're also, of course, within the application process itself, finding that students are declaring because, of course, it's in their interest to do so. So for those universities, for instance, where students are doing some form of admissions test, asking for additional time, asking for reasonable adjustments to the process is a sensible thing to do, because, of course, it allows their achievements to be viewed in the context appropriately, as opposed to students' performance being misjudged. And I think the other thing that we're probably very conscious of is that students are more aware now of the way that universities are using context in their admissions decisions, and probably a greater acceptance of what that actually means for outcomes. I do think it's important to recognise that there are some interesting choices that I think that students are making, and they are being kind of played out, I think, based on their personal circumstances. We know, for instance, from UCAS analysis of data, that students from the most disadvantaged 20% of the population are 50% of them are likely to look at universities within easy travel distance of where they live, compared to about 17% of students from the most advantaged quintile in households. So again, some of this not out of keeping with what we are aware of from interrogation of data elsewhere. Equally, if we're thinking about why that is, in some cases it's linked to cultural factors, the fact that maybe they have a part-time job that they're reluctant to sacrifice, or maybe in fact is intrinsic to their confidence in being able to afford to study, or in fact linked into peer decisions as well. So if the majority of your friends are going to a particular university, how much does that influence student choice? And again, there's been quite a lot of work done on that in recent years. Contrast that to the international students, and where reputation of institutions still seems to have a very significant hold in decision making, particularly, I guess, for those who are interested in kind of global recognition of the qualification that they've got. And then a kind of final point, probably worth highlighting, is just the growing sense that the value of a degree is primarily focused on longer term outcomes, employability. We've obviously seen a very strong message in recent years about the opportunities that degree apprenticeships provide. I think, however, a growing recognition amongst applicants that whilst degree apprenticeships have seen a growth of opportunity, it's not geographically spread evenly across the country. And for many students, the opportunity to kind of apply for a degree apprenticeship alongside a more traditional university application is probably a sensible policy to try and ensure that not all routes are closed down too early. So great report. I think, again, now that we're into kind of year 4, we're beginning to see some trends. Clearly, though, the opportunities that students now have to develop their own independence, opportunities to maybe travel a bit more, certainly when compared to lockdown, is encouraging students, I think, to be a bit more adventurous and looking beyond the home, where other factors aren't necessarily overlaying.
Great, thank you so much, Mike. Let's turn now to Lewis.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'd just like to, first of all, start by echoing Andy's message. I do think that this, on the whole, is a very positive outcome. Most things going up, even if it's incremental, but especially well-being, employment, people are getting the grasp and the ideas and the concepts of what they should be getting from higher education is pretty good, and what they should expect when they get there. Some things that do stand out, though, I think Jenny was right to say that the vast majority of students do want some employment, part-time or full. We know that more students are taking on full-time employment while they study. Is really a really good insight, but I don't think that it's necessarily a desire to want to do part-time employment, but more of a necessity. I think that there's a really good sorry, lost all my notes. Yeah, there's a lot of things in here about students having to take on bank loans. 20% of students are now having to rely on bank loans to help them support for their cost of living. I think that's quite a telling statistic. I think a lot of students on campus, I know every student I speak to has maxed out their overdraft, and that's really indicating that the sector should be doing more to provide for these students, whether that's bringing back bursaries or trying to get the government to increase grants or bring back grants, and universities doing the same as well. I think it's quite weird as well to see that students are willing to take on short-term, in the resilience section, willing to take on short-term discomfort for long-term gain. I really do think that says a lot. These students are willing to take on these overdrafts, which only have most of the time a 1-year grace period before they start paying massive interest rates sometimes for their long-term gain. It really does speak to, and I think Mike was just saying it. Sorry, I'm forgetting names. I think Mike was just saying about how students really do see higher education as an investment, and really are buying into this sort of commercialized idea of education. Not too long ago, education was completely free. I understand the pressures of higher education now, and I do think that it should be accessible for everyone. But students are really starting to understand the trends, that it's seen as an investment and that students should get a return on that. And I think that really speaks to the employment side that we're seeing, the increase in employment, seeing that students want to get jobs, they want part-time jobs while they're working, they want full-time jobs, good careers afterwards. I think that's a really interesting statistic. Something that I'm a bit puzzled on, but also maybe there's some good understanding to be made here, is that well-being has gone up. People have a really good understanding of well-being on their index score this year, but we're not seeing that trend when students become higher education students. Only 28% of higher education students find that they have very good health in comparison to 48% of students, in 48% of the general population. I think that should be raising absolute alarm bells for everyone, that students are having not brilliant, but a lot better health before they start higher education, and then it's rapidly declining. I think that should be ringing alarm bells for the government, and it's a shame that the government didn't include students in their NHS plan just the other week. Just going back to what Jenny was saying, the second biggest concern for students was that they were concerned about juggling work and studying. Again, coming right back to that part-time employment, 68% of students are now undertaking employment while they are studying. Very, very alarming. Some of these courses are increasing in their contact hours and expecting more from students to be able to read. I know that when I've just recently graduated, but I was having to read 1,000 pages a week for my law degree. Not fun. Not fun when you're trying to balance that with a 20-hour-a-week bar shift. And having to get up for 9 a.m. lectures after working at 4 a.m. club night the night before. So yeah, that's something needs to change. But also, yeah, fifth biggest concern, studying late into the night. you finish your bar shift and you're then having to go and do the work ready for your 9 a.m. lecture. There needs to be a definite change, and it's a shame that students are sort of buying into this idea that it has to be this way. It's not shame, maybe not the right word. Students do still want it, but I think it's more of a want out of necessity rather than desire. Some other indicators. There was a good thing on social. A lot of students were coming to university wanting to make more friends, wanting to build a better community, but maybe not really having an understanding of what it's all about and how to do that. There was a HEPI report on England's curriculum and assessment review, sponsored by the University of Chester, which says that students don't feel prepared for the non-academic aspects of university life and would like to see more preparation for higher education in the school curriculum. That was mentioned at the top of this PowerPoint. Get a good insight into what university life is like before university, and then the whole, sorry, lots of things going on. Coming in, they've only seen a few episodes of Fresh Meat when their older brother or their mom's watching it on the television, and all they're seeing is partying. They don't really understand what a students' union is, how to join a society, where they can make their friends, where they can make these communities. And I think there does definitely need to be a lot more communication on that aspect. But anyway, thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you very much, Lewis, for those insights. Super interesting. And last but not least, we've got Eleni, who will give her reflections from the school and sixth form perspective.
Hello, morning all. I'm coming from the perspective of working with post-16 students day to day, and the report does align with what we are seeing in our context. So there is definitely greater confidence amongst our pupils in attending university, greater confidence with future employability, which is really positive, and making friends and being part of a community, which the report highlights. Our student voice and feedback gives us a clear picture of what our learners hope to gain from higher education. And what we have found is that their motivations include access to better career opportunities and future earning potential, gaining those transferable skills to increase employability, and the chance to specialise in areas of interest while developing academic, personal skills, and also opportunities for personal growth and exploring life beyond the classroom. And this also aligns with the report. Although it's not part of a formal study, the themes there are mirrored in some of the top themes identified for motivations for going to university in the report. But what really struck me in the report, and something I want to talk about, is the indication that students who are eligible for free school meals are more likely to go straight into work or attend university if they can avoid the financial burden of living away from home. Now, this trend echoes what we are seeing on the ground. This year, the proportion of Year 13 students wanting to apply to university has slightly decreased in our context. And this may be attributed to the fact that our current Year 13 cohort are slightly more disadvantaged in our school. So for those students, the prospect of attending university during the cost of living crisis can feel overwhelming. So we've tried to introduce an academic mentoring and coaching programme to give that tailored support and guidance for our most disadvantaged students, because we know that access to higher education can be life-changing, and we want to try and support and remove those barriers. That was something that really struck me in the report that I just wanted to focus on. I want to echo the point that Lewis made with regards to well-being. So the report highlights that young people report their well-being is better, but growing up today really does present unique challenges and ever-present pressures of social media, financial insecurity, the volatile global landscape. They're all contributing to a growing sense of uncertainty, and sadly, we are seeing a rise in mental health issues among young people, particularly anxiety and depression, which it would seem Lewis is also seeing at HE. And this does remain a concern for schools and sixth forms nationwide, not just within our context. So that was something that I wanted to highlight. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Ellie, and all our panelists. And thank you for all the questions that are coming in. We're going to take them in groups of 3. So do keep putting the questions in. We should get through 3, maybe 4 rounds, and upvote any questions that you particularly want asked. And let's ask all the panelists just to switch on their cameras. And my colleague Emma will unmute people so they can ask their own questions. So let's turn first of all to Heather Hunter, and then Helen Carasso has asked a great question, and Gregory Dash in this first round. Thank you. Over to you, Heather, to just read out the question as soon as your mic's on.
Hi, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so my question was just about, why do you think there's such a divide on attitudes towards AI, and why do you think it's sort of the UK applicants who seem to be more against it? Just personally, I think a lot of the talk that I see online around AI is around the environmental impacts of such systems, the high amount of water that needs to be used. So I would just love to hear other opinions on why we think that UK students are rejecting that more than the international ones.
Thank you. And Helen?
Hello, everybody, and particularly Mike. Hello to you. We used to work together, for those who wonder why that was. And what I wanted to ask particularly was about Jenny's presentation, which is you've had a whole range of various, what we might call negative measures, concerns, stresses, anxieties. Do these all basically tend to occur within the same subset of students? Are they different ways of measuring the same group of 25 to 30% of individuals who are expecting to feel pressure, feeling pressure, and therefore on whom support measures should be focused? Or do you think that these are occurring much more scattered across the wider student community?
Thank you. And Gregory.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. I was just interested in what I think it was Andy mentioned, the transactional attitude to education. Wondering where people thought that maybe came from. And I know Andy's ready for a bit of an answer in there, but I'm interested in what the panel thinks, and generally as well about how that might impact on interest in postgraduate study. As Andy noted, yeah, that attitude towards research for research's sake rather than being for getting a job. Doctorate doesn't guarantee you a job sometimes. Thank you.
Super, super. So I'll just ask the panelists to pick any of those questions they would like to jump in on.
Can I try and tackle the AI question? I think a lot of it is about students' exposure to AI. I think you'll find a lot of this international applicants, it will be embedded within the schools that they're at. It'll be something that they're broadly being encouraged to engage with. Whereas I suspect, particularly in the UK, that may not be something that is within the classroom. We've seen some very interesting attitudes towards AI, particularly from the previous government. And I think we're kind of possibly falling behind in the ways that people are seeing it as a potentially positive force. A lot of the commentary is about how it encourages people to rely on doing activity that they should otherwise be doing. There's a lot of debate at the moment about using AI to help you structure your personal statement, for instance. But if we take Lewis's subject, law for years has spent a lot of time kind of churning through case law, trying to find appropriate thing. AI can do that in seconds, and therefore you could actually use it very positively in the legal system to give you more thinking time rather than spending time hitting the books and doing your research. So I think a lot of it is about the current exposure that the students will get through their schools in particular.
Thank you, Mike, for addressing that. Yeah.
Can I pick up on the last one? I did make a comment about this transactional, and it's clearly it's the way HE is now, with people paying high fees and investing a lot in the university or the higher education experience, and return on investment So it's quite a sort of calculated cost-benefit calculation that people are making. You know, if I'm going to invest this amount, and if my family are going to invest this amount, because it is striking to me how the family is now going behind the student, saying, no, we will help you through this period. What's the return going to be? I think that's inevitable. The downside, of course, and this comes out throughout the report, is that those who are on low income, the free school mealers, if you like, are going to have very different calculations. And there's increasing evidence of people from lower income backgrounds hesitating because of the upfront costs, if you like, of this investment. Even if they think it's a good idea in the long term, it may actually just be practically bloody difficult for them to get into this because they don't have the family support, etc., etc. So I do think it's a trend, but there are some worrying aspects of it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Andy. Jenny, I don't know if you've got any comments on Helen's question about multiple stresses and which groups are feeling certain stresses.
Yeah, I can't give a very precise answer because there are so many different questions that we ask that we'd have to do quite a big piece of data science, I think, to see, is it this just one kind of group who are having a really terrible time. But I think what we can see when we look at the demographic breakdown, that there are some demographics that are just particularly disadvantaged in multiple areas. So I think in general terms, yes, there are some groups that you will see in the report, you know, students, applicants with a disability, LGBTQ applicants, free school meals applicants are particularly disadvantaged in several different areas.
Fantastic, fantastic. I think we'll jump to a few more questions. We've got a few coming in. So the next one that's been the most upvoted is from Verity Pillinger Cork. We'll take hers in a moment. And then we'll go to John Brennan next, and also Mike Larkin in this round. So we'll take 3 questions at once. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my question was really about the use of the term international and to what level there are differences internationally on things like AI and sustainability, and if that's drawn out in the report.
Thank you. And John next, John Brennan.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I was just thinking about the lifelong learning entitlement and the sense in which higher education is moving away from being something that happens at the end, just at the end of schooling. And as we've heard already, it's a part-time version of life anyway now. The 68% who are working part-time. But in fact, they may well be studying part-time in 20 years' time. So I just think about, you know, hearing something about the higher education experience in later life, and is that going to becoming a new normal? We often hear that very few people will have one single career, and the return to higher education to change career. You know, there's a lot of potential changes that are happening, I think.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And now to Mike.
There we go. I hope you can hear me. Okay. I was really impressed by what Lewis had to say. He gives a reality for maybe half the students. A lot of students have to live that reality. And as a former lecturer and professor, I'm getting concerned. And I wonder if any of the panel are concerned about the possibility that universities, in reacting to the loss of time, commuting, lack of money in students, that they're actually constricting the curriculum and the study time in order to accommodate these students. Is anybody concerned that it's drifting in that direction? Lewis is nodding furiously while I said that. Interesting. We should maybe talk sometime, Lewis.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, we'll turn to the panel to pick on those questions. Lewis, do you want to go first and respond to perhaps that question or any of the others?
Yeah, I'd love to respond to Mike's question. Thank you. Two things. Yeah, really concerned. I work in a students' union. Really concerned about what that means for students and students' unions, because they can't get involved in extracurricular activities. They can't volunteer anymore. They can't join societies. They can't join sports clubs. They can't do any of that because they're having to spend so much time in part-time jobs, in full-time jobs. They can't engage in the communities that coming to higher education is meant to sort of be about. And that's, I think, why it sort of feeds into this commercialized idea of university, because they see university as only this education tool to get a job, which is such a shame. But yeah, also universities should be scared and should be worried. But I do think there's ways around it. I do think there's positivity in this. I really think that UKVI should be changing some of its rules on hybrid learning, because the one way around this is allowing students to take their learning when they need to. I do think that students should be coming onto seminars. I'm not saying they're coming onto campus for seminars. I'm not saying do it all online, do online distance learning. I'm not saying that at all. I think it's really important that we have students on campuses to build these communities and let them engage in things like the Students' Union, plug. But no, I think that things like lectures, where it's not really 100%, you know, you're not allowed to talk to the person sitting next to you in the lecture. You don't really like engage that much because it's more talked at you. I think things like lectures should be distance, and then things like seminars come onto campus. And it also cuts the costs for students. Then they're not having to skip meals so they can afford a bus pass. You know, anyway, there's different things. But yeah, really interesting question.
Great ideas. And any panelists wish to take any of the other questions? We've got Verity's on international students, the breakdown there, and John's on mature learners and things like the LLE coming on board. Any of the panelists wish to pick up on those? Got Mike, yeah.
I think the international student is an interesting one, and probably would require a bit more deeper dive into the information. But if you think about maybe even just the qualifications that students will be doing as a preparation, a lot of the international students likely be doing something like the International Baccalaureate. They'll be doing the Community Action Service element, where that will be kind of addressing issues like sustainability. Whereas in the UK, of course, we tend to be, you know, you do a particular subject, it fits within a particular box. If you were doing geography, you might be doing something around sustainability. You probably wouldn't be doing that if you're doing a maths A level. So I think that may, you know, that may be explaining some of the attitudes towards AI, some of the attitudes towards sustainability, and certainly you'd need to probably have a lot more granular information. The other thing, the question about students and I guess that issue around, you know, what is a student existence nowadays at university? You know, I think one of the real strengths of the UK sector is we do have a lot of variety. So, you know, you go from universities like Cambridge, where it's still pretty much, you know, a fairly academic, very focused, tutorially led system, to institutions who are very much adapted to having students who are working and studying, doing block teaching, fitting their kind of processes and their timetable around the student availability, rather than making the student fit into the institution's kind of pattern of working.
Great. And Andy, over to you.
Yeah, just to comment on what Mike just said, I think that's absolutely right. I think the diversification I was talking about in the student body is being met by a diversification in the higher education provider network as well. And absolutely right. We're now getting very different institutions operating in very different ways. And one thing the report doesn't go into in great detail is online. I mean, there are now some very, very dynamic online delivery institutions, and interesting. Lewis, as always, fascinating to hear what he has to say, because I think a lot of students are looking for that blended learning, that it's more convenient in many ways in this much more, as I say, transactional, busy work plus study environment. it's an option that's becoming more and more attractive, I think. But just on the lifelong learning entitlement, I am biased because I'm a chief executive of Lifelong Education Institute, so we've got a sort of cognitive bias towards lifelong learning. We're all living longer. Technology is changing. I think it's inevitable that this is the next phase in the way in which the education system develops. I don't think it's going to be a big bang. I think it's going to take some time, and there are questions about the demand for the current version of the lifelong learning entitlement. But the idea of having an HE account that you don't need to spend all at once in a 3-year degree straight away. You could maybe do a bit and get yourself a level 4 qualification that would get you a step up the career path you want to do and reserve the rest for later. I think that will begin to take hold and begin to change the behaviour patterns of students, particularly those from lower income backgrounds and those who are, concerned about the cost, if you like, up front of going to university. So potential revolution, a slow revolution, but potentially I think it is something that's going to be an increasing factor.
Fabulous, thank you, Andy. But I'm going to we've got a few more questions coming. We've got about 7 minutes left, so I'll take another 3 questions, and I'm going to actually squeeze one of my own questions as well. So there'll be 4 questions. So in a moment, we're going to turn to Joel first of all, Joel Keston, and then Gregory again, who's had some upvotes on one questions, and then Susanna Lane. Thirdly, and just before we do that, a 4th question from me, which possibly will be that targeted maybe at Eleni to start with, but anybody that wishes to take it. We heard super recently from Arif Ahmed at the Office for Students. He reported to the BBC just a matter of days ago that in light of the new legislation on the freedom of speech that's coming to universities, he said that students do need to be prepared to be hearing views and ideas that they don't like, that they don't agree with, and even that may offend them. I just wondered, in light of this report, are we preparing students in the right way for that scenario, or is there anything else we should be doing? Perhaps Eleni might take that for anyone in the panel. But let's, while you're thinking about that, let's first of all turn to Joel.
Sorry, I don't know if you can hear me. Yeah, you can now.
Yeah.
I have to unmute myself. Hi, I'm Joel. I'm the Student Engagement Manager at Sheffield Hallam. And I think that I did an article based on the results from last year. I thought it was really interesting, but I don't want to extrapolate too much across those results that are sector-wide. So I'm just wondering if there's any breakdowns that we could have of the data, but I'm particularly interested in Russell Group and post-92 institutions, because I think that there's similar challenges for some of the comparator organisations.
Thank you. And I think we've got, is it Susanna next? Susanna, do you want to read out your question?
Hi there, I'm not sure if you can hear me okay?
Yeah. Great.
Yeah, great, thanks. Just wondering, going back right back to the start and the data that suggests that students are now looking quite transactionally at universities. I was just wondering if any of the data sort of gets into Scottish undergrads who still are eligible for free higher education. Just wondering if there's any difference there in the kind of transactional attitudes and the return on investment that Scottish undergrads are seeking.
Thank you. Thank you. And Gregory.
Thanks. I would second that as well about the breakdown. I would love to see some Russell Group's university data, post-92, that'd be great as well. But my question was about youth voice, and it's more of a methodology question. So wondering if you considered, I'm a big supporter of youth voice, and wondering if youth voice was built into the methodology, and if so, how? Thanks.
Any of the panelists wish to dive in on any of those questions? Differences in the data, youth voice, and so on. Yeah.
I'd like to come back to your question, if that's okay, Lucy.
Great.
I think that students nowadays are seeing like such a range of views already. You know, everyone's got TikTok, everyone's got Instagram, everyone's being constantly bombarded with media and things that upset them and annoy them. But I really think that with what the OFS is doing around freedom of speech is making a mountain out of a molehill. There's students really are expecting to hear voices that aren't their own and to hear things that they might not agree with 100%. But I think students are now just more wary and understanding of things that just aren't right. They're a lot more savvy and tech savvy and understand that, and they're very happy to call things out that are wrong. We see it all on our student union councils. We see it all over campus. I'm from Sussex, so maybe I've got a different bias, but yeah, I really think that further education providers don't really need to be doing a load of new stuff to try and make sure that everyone's views are understood and heard, because I think that students understand that already. But I don't know.
Great, that's great. No, great answer. Thank you so much. Any panelists wish to take any of those other questions? We've just got 4 minutes left, so we need to be super brief. Jenny, over to you. Thank you. Oh, sorry, Eleni.
Apologies. I was just going to come in on the point that Lewis made. I think Lewis is absolutely right. Young people today are really, really savvy, and they really are aware of what is acceptable and what isn't, and they are definitely not afraid to call people out if they would disagree with something. Your question, Lucy, was about how are we preparing young people to hear views that don't align with their own and to potentially be offended. So something that we incorporate into our context is we have a weekly Votes for Schools system where we discuss topical issues, and the student cohort can vote on these topical issues. And it's a really safe space for students to hear each other's opinions and views. All the while, schools are promoting British values, so I think by the time they get to higher education, they're a lot more confident in how to navigate their way around situations where they might be exposed to things that might cause offence and how to go about it.
Fantastic, thank you, Eleni. And then we'll go to Jenny. And just while I'm doing that, just if all the panelists can just think of one takeaway they'd like to see implemented from this report, we'll just round up 30 seconds each before we close. But I'll go over to Jenny.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to some of the data questions. The answer is that it's technically possible to do most of those breakdowns, but it's quite a lot of work. So it's something we can definitely consider for next year's applicant index, but we may be able to do something this year, and we'll look into that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Okay, so we're just 2 minutes to the end. So I'm just going to go and ask the panelists in reverse order, just to give us their one takeaway from this report, one thing they'd like to see happen, or a burning question, just to give us sort of 20 seconds, 30 seconds on that. So we'll go in reverse order. We'll go to Eleni first.
So I'd just like to say that this, as educators, we've really got to continue to listen to students and understand their experience to really ensure that they can all thrive irrespective of what path they choose. And this report really highlights the important work that needs to happen. I think kind of my sort of takeaway really is linked to what Andy and Lewis were referring to in terms of making HE more accessible, more affordable, and looking at these potential future options of hybrid models. If we're talking about equity and inclusion, then this is something I think that is worth further exploration.
Fantastic, brilliant. And next to Lewis.
Yeah, I think I'd like to see a reintroduction of university grants for students. That'd be my number one.
Great, very clear. And next to Mike.
I think just encouraging students to be prepared to tell us what their support needs are and identify where we can assist them. And I think, there are ways that we can do that really effectively. I think the real concern is where students feel that they're going to be stigmatized by speaking out.
Fantastic. And Andy?
Yeah, I think I'd just like to see, I know it's already happening, a continuing development of tailored systems of support for students who are, for example, doing 20 hours part-time work, commuting in, rather than traditional students. So how does the Students' Union and all the other services work for these increasing numbers of different types of students who are having different types of experience?
Fantastic, thank you. And finally, Jenny.
Yeah, I think I've come away from this thinking that I'm quite concerned about neurodivergent students as a group. I was before, but things are not getting better.
Brilliant, that's very clear. Okay, we're just about to wrap up. It's just 12 o'clock. So it just remains for me to thank all our speakers for joining us this morning, particularly also to thank Jenny and Unite Students for collaborating with HEPI on this report. And thank you to all my colleagues at HEPI who've helped with this report and this webinar. I think the whole team's been involved: Emma, Carol, Josh, Rose, and Nick. And to thank all the participants for coming online this morning and for asking such stimulating questions. Quick announcement from me from HEPI. We've got 2 more reports coming out this month on very different topics. One on the decline of language learning at all stages of formal education in the UK. And then we've got a groundbreaking report soon after on the impact of menstruation on higher education study. So sign up to our blogs and you'll get all the information. And last but not least, if you enjoyed this webinar, why don't you join us on the 12th of August for our webinar with UCAS, which will do a preview of this year's A-level and vocational qualifications. Thanks everybody for listening. Have a great rest of Tuesday and goodbye.
Bye.